You won't believe what happened next. A team in Africa says they built a car that fuels itself from the invisible radio waves floating through the air. No plug, no gas, no charging stops. And when you park it at home, it can feed your house up to a hefty chunk of power. If that sounds bonkers, stick around because the story behind it is even wilder than the headline. Imagine the space around you as an ocean you can't see. Cell towers buzzing, W whispering, TV and radio broadcasts rippling across neighborhoods, satellites beaming signals down from orbit. We swim in electromagnetic energy all day, every day, and most of the time we just ignore it. Now, what if someone figured out how to borrow that ocean and run a car on it? That's the claim shaking up conversations from tech meets to living rooms across the globe. And it didn't come out of a Silicon Valley lab or a shiny corporate R&D center. It came from a self-taught inventor in Southern Africa whose life reads like a movie. Hardship, grit, late-night tinkering, an idea that refuses to die. And a chorus of skeptics asking the question you might be asking too, how on earth could that even work? Before we dive in, let me level with you. Extraordinary claims deserve tough questions. We're going to talk about what's being promised, why so many people are excited, and exactly why scientists are raising their eyebrows. Think of this as a guided tour through a fascinating, controversial idea equal parts, dream and debate. Ready? Let's roll down our story. Starts in a crowded township where money was short and talent was not. The inventor at the center of this tale grew up in a neighborhood where the soundtrack was the hum of life market chatter. Radio songs drifting from windows, the whir of old fans and sewing machines. School became a luxury he couldn't afford after the age of 14. But curiosity? That never ran out. If you've ever taken apart a remote just to see the little world inside, you get the vibe. He scavenged parts, hacked together a homemade transmitter, rigged up a poor man's navigation gadget, even played with turbine designs. No one was handing him a lab coat and a grant. He built his own lab on a kitchen table. He talks about his ideas like they came in flashes. The way some people describe song lyrics arriving at 3 a.m., whether you chalk it up to genius, grit, faith, or all three. He kept chasing one big problem: clean, independent power. Around 2009, his attention locked onto one question. What if energy isn't just on the grid or in the sun or the wind? What if there's energy hidden in plain sight, riding on the radio frequencies that blanket our cities and villages? Could you harvest that and make something bigger than a blinking LED? Could you power a home? A workshop? A car? That line of thinking led to a device he's been guarded about, his own custom unit that, he says, absorbs radio frequency energy and turns it into usable DC electricity. No, not solar. Not wind. Not a battery pack being secretly charged with a cable behind the curtain. He describes it as an RF energy converter, built from parts he designed himself. In his telling, it captures slivers of energy from the air, tiny amounts, and concentrates them to do real work. He leans on a cocktail of ideas: radio waves, natural resonances, even the background hum of the environment. And he's been consistent about one thing. He believes it can scale far beyond what the textbooks say is practical. Now picture this claim in action. The car born from those experiments looks like any modern vehicle at first glance. Sleek body, the usual doors and lights. But the pitch flips your expectations. Instead of a gas tank, it houses that RF converter and supporting systems. Instead of charging at a wall, it feeds off the ambient electromagnetic soup around us. On paper, the specs sound almost like science fiction, a range that doesn't end because there's nothing to refill. Top speeds that reach highway-ready numbers around 200 kilometers per hour, and a bonus party trick: roll into your driveway, connect an output line, and supply roughly 15 kilowatts to your home. Enough to run the essentials in many households, and then some. If you've ever dealt with blackouts or rationed your generator fuel, you can see why that would turn heads fast. There's more. The team collaborated with a manufacturer in Asia to help build the vehicle, aiming to create something that's not just a one-off prototype, but a platform cars, bikes, maybe even stationary generators. In regions where power cuts are a weekly reality, where villages sit miles from the nearest grid connection, the idea is intoxicating. Energy freedom anywhere you can park. Imagine emergency crews keeping equipment running during outages. Imagine clinics that never go dark. Imagine students who can study at night, not by candle, but by clustered LEDs humming on energy literally pulled from the air. If you're hearing this thinking, no way, the math doesn't add up, you're not alone. Let's talk about that. Radio waves carry energy, sure, but compared to sunlight on a bright day, it's peanuts. Roughly speaking, sunshine blasts down around 1,000 watts per square meter at noon on a clear day. That's why solar panels work. There's a lot to harvest. Radio frequency power out in the open is usually millions of times weaker. We're talking tiny fractions of a watt per square meter in most environments, microwatts, not kilowatts. That's enough for ultra-low power sensors, maybe a small calculator, sometimes a battery trickle. But a car cruising down the highway? That's a heavy lift. To bridge that gap, you need something wildly efficient at capturing and concentrating ambient RF, or some additional physical principle the mainstream hasn't accepted. That's precisely where the controversy kicks in. He shared demonstrations where a car, and even a motorbike appeared to run without plugging in. People have flown in from overseas to look. Videos have circulated. In the room, the effect is impressive. Outside the room, the scientific community keeps asking for the same thing. Independent, PEA, review validation with transparent methods and repeatable tests. So far, the data available to the public hasn't quieted the doubts. And to make matters thornier, the inventors chose to file less on the patent side and more on the trade secret side after running into walls. According to them, they were told their claims clash with fundamental physics, making patenting difficult. So instead of laying the schematics bare, they tightened the vault. That protects a secret if there is one, but it also fuels skepticism. People want to see the numbers. People want to replicate. Let's step back and paint the human picture, because it's impossible to separate the tech from the journey. The inventor's life hasn't been easy. He said publicly that he faced intimidation, that he was targeted, that an incident in the United States left him sick and took the life of a colleague in early 2017. Those are serious allegations, and they haven't been adjudicated in public forums. But they form part of the legend around the project, a small team pushing a disruptive idea, ruffling powerful feathers, paying a price, and refusing to stop. At home, leadership encouraged him to keep building locally, to plant this flag in African soil and show the world what homegrown ingenuity can do. As momentum built, the team set a date to formally unveil vehicles and bikes powered by this RF system, positioning it as a milestone for the country and a signal to the planet. Innovation isn't a one-way export. It can thrive anywhere. Online, reactions were split. Some people were over the moon at last, a way out of the energy trap. Others were blunt. Extraordinary claims, zero reproducible proof equals pump the brakes. And that's the tension that still defines this conversation today. Now, let's dig a little deeper into the tech, at least conceptually. Radio frequency energy sits on a spectrum from very low frequencies used for long-distance communication, through FM and TV bands, up to microwaves used by certain communications and radar systems. These waves carry energy. Antennas are how we couple to that energy. When you hold a small radio up to the air and it plays music, that's not free energy. It's receiving a signal generated by a transmitter burning real power somewhere else. Energy harvesters do a similar idea but for electricity. Capture a sliver of the broadcast, rectify it, turn AC into DC, and store it or use it. In labs and commercial products, this typically powers tiny things, an environmental sensor, a small tag, maybe trickling a SUPERCAPOR dot, so when someone says, "We're running a car off ambient RF," it begs the big question. How are you capturing so much more energy than anyone else? Are you focusing on specific hotspots? Are you leveraging resonant structures tuned to local towers? Are you using large, efficient antenna arrays hidden in body panels? Even then, typical ambient levels are so low that the numbers look brutal. That's why mainstream engineers suspect there's either an unacknowledged power source in the loop, a hidden battery or a charge that came from somewhere else, or a measurement misinterpretation. To change minds, you need airtight, open, testing sealed rooms. Independent investigators, power meters on every line. Shielded environments where you can dial RF levels up and down and see the output respond accordingly. In short, you need to do the scientific dance. Control, measure, replicate. To be fair, science is full of moments where the shock came first and the paper came later. Wireless itself was once heresy. Heavier than air flight was ridiculed. Germ theory sounded wild when people believed bad air was the culprit. But the common thread in every breakthrough that stuck is this: once the spark lit, it was tested to within an inch of its life. People who hated each other repeated the experiments and got the same results. Equations lined up. Devices performed. Markets formed. If this RF-powered platform is legit, it will follow the same path. That path may be rough, political, and emotionally expensive, but it's the only way it becomes more than a headline. Let's talk impact, because that's the heartbeat under all this. Picture a future where your car isn't just a ride. It's your household generator. You leave work, pull into your driveway, flip a switch, and your kitchen lights glow off the car's output. No grid, no diesel, no waiting for the sun. If you've lived through load shedding or watched your freezer thaw during outages, that's not a tech demo, that's relief. Scale that across townships and villages where poles and wires haven't arrived, and suddenly modern life doesn't wait on bureaucracy. Makers can run machines. Hospitals can keep life-saving equipment going. Students can study after dark without kerosene fumes. That's the dream that's ignited so much passion here. Economically, if such tech worked as pitched, the dominoes fall fast. Fuel stations would struggle if vehicles didn't need petrol or external charging. Home energy bills? Imagine them dropping to zero if cars could backfeed easily and legally. Power utilities would have to reinvent themselves around stability, storage, and grid orchestration rather than raw supply. The geopolitics of energy would wobble. Countries that spend fortunes importing fuel could redirect that money into schools, roads, and startups. Fewer oil-based political entanglements. Fewer reasons to wrangle over pipelines. It sounds utopian because in a way it is. That's why the claims scare some people and thrill others. But let's keep our feet on the ground. Even if RF harvesting could be amplified, the laws of thermodynamics don't clock out. You can't get more power out than is available in the environment. If someone says they can, you expect either a new physical effect or a human error. Right now, what we can say with confidence is that RF harvesting is a real field useful for tiny devices, and that extending it to something as hungry as a vehicle will require an extraordinary leap. The team behind this car says they've made that leap. The burden of proof is theirs. The world is watching Dot, so where does the journey go from here? If you were advising this project, you'd likely say, open the hood to a neutral lab. Invite experts who don't owe you favors. Run your device in a Faraday cage, a shielded space that blocks external RF, and see what happens. Sweep frequencies, change power levels, document everything, publish the methods. If the output tracks the input as expected, you'll have a queue of believers forming at the door. If it doesn't, well, better to learn now than later. Either way, knowledge advances. There's also a cultural heartbeat to this story that matters. For decades, the narrative has been that cutting-edge tech comes from a handful of rich hubs and flows outward. This project flips that script. It says the next giant leap might not come from where the world expects. It might be built with scrap and stubbornness, by people who never got the memo that they were supposed to wait their turn. That's powerful, not just as an invention, but as a message to every young tinkerer soldering in a garage right now. Talent is evenly distributed. Opportunity isn't. But sometimes, a good idea bulldozes its way through the gap. Let's address the elephant in the room: fear. If a device really disrupts trillion-dollar markets, it makes sense that some players won't send fruit baskets. History isn't short on stories where incumbents lobbied, litigated, or simply absorbed their competition. But fear can also become a storytelling crutch. Not every patent office clerk is part of a conspiracy. Sometimes, no, just means show me harder proof. Both things can be true. Systems protect themselves, and claims must clear a high bar. Our job as curious humans is to hold space for both possibilities, skepticism without cynicism, hope without gullibility. Now, about the timing. There was a planned date to roll these vehicles out publicly, with national pride on full display. That pageant matters? It says, we're not asking permission, but the follow-up will matter more. Are there third-party test results? Are there robust safety standards? Is there a pathway to mass production that isn't just a press release? The internet moves on quickly. Reality takes its time. You might be wondering, okay, let's say it's not possible to run a car forever on ambient RF. Does that mean the whole thing is a waste? Not necessarily. Moonshots often leave useful footprints. A project pushing the limits of energy harvesting might yield better antennas, smarter power management, or hybrid systems that pair RF with something else in clever ways. Sometimes the headline promise doesn't pan out, but the side inventions change industries. Think of all the spin-offs from space exploration, materials, sensors, imaging, communications. A bold attempt rarely comes home empty-handed. There's also a broader movement happening, particularly across the African continent. Leaders encouraging homegrown solutions. Entrepreneurs building for local realities first. If this project inspires a wave of engineers to tackle power poverty through solar microgrids, affordable storage, efficient appliances, smart meters, that alone is a win with measurable impact. Energy access isn't just a convenience. It's the difference between stagnation and momentum. When lights come on, economies wake up. Let's sketch a day in the life if this tech were real and everywhere, just to feel the stakes. Dawn breaks over a neighborhood that isn't limited by the grid map. Delivery scooters hum silently, not because they charged overnight, but because they don't need to. A school opens, powered by a couple of parked vehicles supplying consistent electricity to a computer lab. A clinic refrigerator hums, keeping vaccines at the right temperature through the hottest months. Families cook without worrying if tonight's outage will hit mid-meal. The air is quieter without generators coughing smoke. The smell of burnt diesel fades. When a storm knocks down lines, nobody panics. Local power sources keep humming. Now flip the lens. Suppose it doesn't work as promised. Suppose careful testing shows the outputs can't meet the claims without hidden sources. What then? The story still teaches a lesson about persistence, the importance of rigorous validation, and the value of bid visions even when they fall short. Not every bold claim leads to a revolution, but every bold claim that gets tested teaches us how to separate magic from method, and that's priceless in an age drenched in hype. I want to circle back to the inventor for a minute. Whether you see him as a pioneer, a provocateur, or a dreamer, the courage to try publicly, loudly, and against the grain deserves a nod. He refused to let circumstances dictate the ceiling of his imagination. He mentored teams, he built prototypes, he kept showing up even when doors shut in his face. He staked his name on an audacious idea that might change everything. Or not. Either way, he turned the spotlight toward a question we don't ask often enough. Who gets to invent the future? If you've watched this far, your mind is probably ping-ponging between this could rewrite the rulebook and this needs serious proof. That's exactly where a healthy mind should be. It's great to dream big. It's smarter to test big, too. The best outcome here will be robust, open evaluations measurements in controlled conditions, data that anyone can scrutinize, and partnerships with universities and labs who can put reputations on the line. The second best outcome might be a suite of spin-offs that make everyday tech better. The worst outcome would be to let tribalism take over, believers and skeptics, shouting past each other so loudly that the real work, the experiments, the refinements, the hard questions gets drowned out. So, what do you think? Would you ride in a car that sips power from the air? If it parked in your driveway and pushed out 15 kilowatts, what would you run first? The fridge, the borehole pump, the router, all the above? And if you're in the show me camp, what test would you run on day one? Full shielding and a power analyzer? A long-haul drive with every cable monitored? A teardown that maps every component? Drop your plan in the comments seriously. Design the perfect test in 3 steps. Let's crowdsource the truth. There's one more thread worth pulling. The way this story reframes where the next wave of innovation might come from. For too long, talent in places far from the usual tech hubs has been forced to migrate or go silent. This project, whatever its ultimate verdict, broadcasts a different message. Build where you stand. Teach kids to solder, to code, to question. Celebrate local wins. Fund labs that don't look like movie sets. And most of all, make room for the kid who can't afford school but can't stop taking things apart. That kid may not follow the rules. That kid might write new ones. As we wrap this up, let me leave you with a balanced take. If the RF-powered vehicle delivers exactly as promised, we are looking at a tectonic shift in energy and transport, one that could make bills vanish, make some industries obsolete, and hand communities the keys to their own power future. If it doesn't, the attempt still shines a light on the hunger for energy, independence, and the creativity bursting across the continent and beyond. Either way, it's forcing a conversation we desperately need. How do we break our addiction to fragile grids and fossil fuels without waiting another generation? I'm excited. I'm cautious. And I'm rooting for the truth to win, whatever that truth is. Because when the dust settles, the only thing that matters is what works, what scales, and what lifts people up. If this deep dive made you think, smash that like button so more curious minds find it. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications because we're just getting started with stories at the edge of what's possible. And tell me in the comments, are we on the verge of unlimited clean energy or witnessing the most compelling tech demo of the decade? Either way, keep your mind open and your questions sharp. The revolution, one way or another, starts with you.